Welcome to the launch of the CDP Ireland 2021 report. Just so we can't be accused of understating the challenge that we face on climate change, I'd like to be very clear at the outset about our key message for today's launch. Yes, we have some very positive messages about the numbers of Irish companies responding. Yes, we have some very positive messages about the news on what companies are doing, setting targets and in their ambition. And Irish companies in general are doing a very good job in the quality of the reports that they're providing compared to the rest of the world. But frankly, we're still not seeing enough concrete action on decarbonisation action plans. The CDP in its global report launch yesterday highlighted this fact, and the fact that only 1% of global companies that are reporting to CDP have provided robust climate action plans. Thus our focus on the conversation of moving from ambition to decarbonisation. My name is Brian O'Kennedy. I'm the Managing Director of Clearstream Solutions, and we're the executive behind the CDP Ireland Network. I'm delighted to be here and on behalf of my colleagues at the CDP Ireland Network to be launching this report. And we have a very exciting agenda for you over the next 60 minutes or so. I'm going to hand over very shortly to Owen Fahy, who's the chair of the CDP Ireland Network. And Owen will be followed by Colin Hunt, who is our event sponsor for the day from AIB. We then have Maxfield Weiss, who's the CDP Executive Director from Europe. And then it's our great pleasure to welcome the Minister, Minister Eamon Ryan, who will actually officially launch and provide us with a keynote for today's event. Gavin Whittaker, my colleague, will then take us through some of the highlights in this year's report. And then we'll get on to what I find is the most interesting part of the whole session is the panel discussion, which will be moderated by my colleague Shay. And we have an expert panel today, really interesting. We have Aisling McCarthy from Unifar, Mary Whitelaw from AIB, and Sean McKeown from Dalata Hotel Group. And we'll be finished by 3 p.m. That's our hope. Just a couple of remarks about CDP as an organization here in Ireland. Our role here is in terms of, I guess there's another slide coming up. The role of the CDP here in Ireland is basically to facilitate global best practice sharing. It's to help companies who are disclosing and reporting in their supply chains and who are trying to manage particularly that Scope 3 challenge. We also offer, based on backed by the support of our sponsors, EPA and SEAI, we offer climate change reporting training, and the companies that are trying to measure or disclose get to understand the key challenges and pathways. And we have lots of knowledge sharing platforms and social media and websites. In fact, today's report will be posted on the www.cdpirelandnetwork.net site, as well as some other interesting articles. And CDP globally provides a platform for investors and asset managers to engage with their investors. So a very, very key part of the whole infrastructure and drive of climate change in Ireland. Some very brief thank yous. I just want to say to our committee, we have a committee of very hard-working volunteers, essentially, who give of their time, headed by Owen Fahy, who's our chair this year, and Cathy Ryan, our vice chair. And these people give of their time to help us guide and to identify the key areas and initiatives that they want us to focus. So thank you, particular to that group and to CDP headquarters for their continued support. And just finally, today wouldn't have happened without our sponsors. I'd like to thank our continuing sponsorship from EPA and SEAI, who are our CDP Ireland Network program sponsors. The report sponsors from today, KBI and KPMG, and finally the event sponsor, AIB. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our chair, Owen, who's going to provide us with a few welcome remarks. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian, and a warm welcome to you all this afternoon on what is, at least in Dublin, a bright sunny afternoon compared to the deluge we had yesterday. So nice to see things getting better on that front, if nothing else. The high attendance at today's event and the strong level of interest we've seen in it, indeed, in the run-up to it, I think is not by any means the first, but another example of the steady increase in participation at the various events of CDP that we have run in recent, over the last couple of years. And I think that increase in interest, that the interest in these events just grows steadily year on year. That's hardly a surprise given the importance of climate change and other sustainability challenges indeed that we face, but it's still very encouraging to see it. And I think I want to focus just on the investor angle for a minute or two, because I think one of the unique features of CDP, and Brian mentioned it briefly in the slide he showed there, I mentioned it there, is that CDP is pretty unique in that it brings investors and corporate entities together to talk to each other, if you like, rather than talking at each other. And I think that, as I said, is a feature of CDP that's a bit underappreciated. I think it's pretty well known out there that CDP does an excellent job in collecting data on carbon emissions and other key data on things like water use and forestry, land degradation, etc. What's much less appreciated, I think, is that investors and corporates work together around the table on a regular basis to achieve that, working very much together. In fact, to the best of my knowledge, it's the only Irish forum, and indeed there aren't many international fora either, where investors and corporates work together to try and increase the level of transparency around these key sustainability challenges and information relating to them. So I'll take just a minute or two, if you don't mind, to just talk about how important this data is to investors, and really especially to reassure corporates and other responders that the information they provide to CDP doesn't just vanish into the ether. It's very much used by investors, which I think is an important point. As an investor and somebody that literally sits in the meetings where these decisions are made, I can tell you that in our case, but in the case of many other investors as well, our portfolio managers, the women and the men that ultimately decide at the end of the day what to buy and what to sell for our investment portfolios, they absolutely do take into account CDP data. They very much do look very carefully at a company's carbon emissions, as you would expect, including increasingly Scope 3 data in more recent years. They absolutely do look to see whether companies that they're considering an investment in have a credible net zero target, ideally one that's verified by SBTi. They absolutely do debate between each other, between the various PMs when looking at a stock, whether that company has, for example, exposure to physical risks or indeed opportunities arising out of climate change. Well, you wouldn't often have physical opportunities, but opportunities of other kinds. They absolutely do analyse where it's relevant, a candidate company for the portfolio, whether or not it has whether it has water consumption issues and whether or not it's involved, for example, in land degradation or deforestation. These are absolutely live issues that are discussed by our portfolio managers every single day in making their investment decisions. And they don't make investment decisions without considering the kind of data that CDP is collecting and is publishing on behalf of investors. So it's a really, really important point, I think, to get across, that this data is essential to investors when considering their portfolios. The great news is that for this and for other reasons, more and more Irish companies, as a result of that, are reporting to CDP. You'll hear more on this later, but we can report already that last year, 55 different Irish companies, Irish-based companies, responded to CDP surveys. That was up from 47 in 2020, so 17% increase. And no less than 307 companies operating in Ireland, many of them multinationals, reported. So excellent level of coverage, and more companies reporting all the time, which is what we've reported pretty much. I haven't checked the numbers, but I think pretty much every year for as long as I've been involved with the CDP, there's been a steady increase in the number of companies reporting. So that's really encouraging. You'll hear more about that later, particularly from Gavin, and also about how Ireland stacks up in that regard relative to other European countries. But in a little spoiler alert, I can tell you that generally the news is good. I think that great response from Irish companies is due in no small part to the work of the CDP Network Ireland Steering Committee, which I've had the privilege of chairing for the last 12 months or so. So I'd like to very sincerely thank all the members of that committee for their great work. And also, and very importantly, to thank the Environmental Protection Agency and the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland for their ongoing support for the CDP, which is really, really important to us. And with that, I'll finish there, and I'll just take the opportunity to welcome Colin Hunt, who, as I'm sure you all know, is the Chief Executive Officer of AIB, who are today's event sponsors. Thank you, Colin, for sponsoring the event, and I'll hand over to you now.
Good afternoon to you all, and thank you, Owen and Brian, for your words of welcome. AIB is delighted to once again sponsor this event, and as such to be part of the ongoing drive to encourage greater understanding and inclusion of the sustainability agenda as core to business strategy, in addition to the increasingly important role of reporting and disclosures to enable greater transparency and learning from best practice. We are living in unprecedented times, uncharted waters, and it would be entirely wrong of me to stand here today and not reference the ongoing conflict in Ukraine and the horrific suffering being endured. We pray for a swift resolution to end this human suffering. Notwithstanding the current conflict, I'm on the record in my belief that the climate challenge is unlike any other we will face in our lifetimes, and it behoves all of us in business to embrace this issue as part of doing business in the future. In AIB, we have been steadfast in our approach to embedding sustainability throughout our business, in our processes, procedures, and resulting customer supports, as we all work towards a net zero future. We are making strong progress, and as our annual results last week demonstrated, we are proving that embracing this agenda is good for our customers, the economy, and ultimately makes good business sense. We are also honoured to have maintained our leadership position within the CDP network since 2016, and we remain the only Irish bank with this record. However, despite our progress, we continue to do more in partnership with our stakeholders and our customers. We're all in this together. This is everyone's issue to address. And I want to commend Brian and the CDP team in the work they have done to engage the Irish business community on this issue. 72 Irish corporates now responding, and a 31% increase in overall responders in 2021. There is a clear appetite for understanding and change. However, I would urge all business leaders here today to engage with the CDP process, understand your own starting point and the best approach for your own business response. Thank you again for the opportunity to address you this afternoon. I wish you well with the rest of the event.
Thank you very much, Colin. I believe next we have Maxfield. Is that correct? I think you ought to welcome Maxfield Weiss, who's the Executive Director of CDP in Berlin.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to join the CDP Ireland network today. Our mission at CDP, it's really clear. We drive our economy and our society to essentially measure and act on environmental impacts to achieve a 1.5 degree and, of course, a nature positive world. Today, we're going to be looking at turning targets into real plans. You see, coming out of COP26, I'm encouraged by the shift in focus, and that's that corporates and investors are being asked by governments to set out credible transition plans. Essentially, you're being asked how you're going to deliver. And I cannot stress this enough, that the task ahead of us, it remains massive. CDP disclosure shows that 1% of companies have all parts of a transition plan. And of course, the latest IPC science from just last week, it made it abundantly clear. Companies need credible plans, clearly showing that they have business models fit for 1.5 degrees. Coupled with this, they must show how capital spending will match and how their governance will deliver. And that's just on climate, because the future of our planet relies on 1.5 degrees, but it's also more than just 1.5. We have to have a focus on nature in tandem. You see, climate and nature, they're two sides of the same coin. Nature is a source that everything humans rely upon to survive, including half of our GDP. And solving this crisis, it means making a systemic transformation through concrete actions, like phasing out fossil fuels, completely ending deforestation, and of course, protecting our biodiversity. And this means ensuring all business activities operate within planetary boundaries and that companies actually have a net positive impact on the world. Now, I know that we can do it. I've seen the progress being made here at CDP, and that includes here in Ireland, where disclosure, it's increasing, and science-based target setting is also increasing. And in Europe, our Green Deal, it's moving into the implementation phase, and the European Climate Pact, it's driving concrete actions to build a greener Europe. And then, of course, we have the European Sustainability Reporting Standards and Taxonomy, which CDP is going to align our corporate reporting practices with. This will improve sustainable finance. In Ireland, it's among the few European countries that has its emissions reduction targets in law. And these targets show the future. And at CDP, we're going to support and encourage Irish corporates, cities, and financial institutions to build that future, to disclose their environmental impacts, to set science-based targets, and then to turn these targets into clear transition plans, because we need serious action right now, because the Earth's future, it's in our hands. Humanity's future, it's in our hands, because the time is now. It's now for nature. And thank you so much. I wish you all a fruitful conversation. And I'd like to give a final thank you to the CDP Ireland Network and Clearstream Solutions for the impact you're having to bring Irish companies and financial systems in line with the net zero and nature positive future. Thank you so much for your partnership. And I wish you all a great afternoon.
And thank you, Maxfield, for your continued support. And we love this addition of the biodiversity metrics to the questionnaire. So keep up the good work. And now I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Gavin Whittaker, who's going to take us through the highlights and maybe some of the lowlights from this year's report. Over to you, Gavin.
Good afternoon, everybody. So the CDP annual report is full of interesting commentary and information. It not only details the companies that are taking action in Ireland, but we can gain insight into the climate plans and significantly understand the progress and performance achieved. I'd like to pick out some of the highlights and explain a number of the trends that we are seeing in the data. I will also discuss some of the areas that responding companies might focus on if they wish to improve their scores in the future. For those of you who have had a chance to download a copy of the report and want to play along at home, I'll be discussing page 10 and page 11, the infographic and the appendices in the report. The interest in climate reporting in Ireland has never been stronger. I realize that we say this every year, but the evidence is supported in the data. There was a 17% increase in the number of Irish companies reporting to the CDP Climate Change Programme in 2021. This builds nicely off the exceptional 52% increase we experienced the previous year. We welcome some new climate change responders to the list, which is always great to see. There's never a perfect time to start reporting to CDP, and sometimes other priorities get in the way. Indeed, some of the companies listed here have previously reported many years ago, and for a variety of reasons see the value and benefits of reporting again. Other companies have just decided that it's not optional anymore, that it just makes good business sense to report. Whatever the motivation, the CDP Ireland network works closely with CDP to encourage and support Irish companies to get involved in the reporting cycle. We now have 55 Irish companies reporting to the CDP Climate Change Programme. Many of them are household names who are leading by example. A few years ago, it was enough just to fill in the CDP form to disclose, and everyone was happy. This is no longer the case. Every year, the bar is raised a little bit higher. When everything is submitted to the CDP, there's always great excitement and a fair share of anxiety when the scoring results are published. It's fair to say that there was disappointment among the Irish companies aiming to get on the CDP A-list. Ireland had no A-list companies in 2021 compared to 5 the previous year. This was consistent with the global decrease in the number of companies on the CDP A-list. There's no question that improvement in a letter score can highlight progress and boost the enthusiasm of the reporting team. As we know, scoring an A is not necessarily the end goal of the process. The objective is for companies to develop transition plans which will quickly bring emissions in line with 1.5 degrees and ultimately have a net positive impact on the world. It's still nice to get an A though, that's human nature, but the collective goal of the process is what's most important. Within that group, we now have 80% of Ireland's top 30 companies by market cap reporting to CDP. This figure was only 63% last year, and we were delighted with that at the time. So real progress has been made to achieve 80%. The top 10 Irish companies all scored an A-. If we compare Irish scores to other parts of the world, we see that 79% of Irish reporting companies scored a B- or higher. This compares to 66% globally. The bottom line is, Irish companies continue to perform well, and this tells us that there's a high level of climate ambition in Ireland. We know for a fact that many of this group will be focusing on getting on the CDP A list in 2022. If we zoom out a little bit, we see there are actually a total of 307 companies who report emissions in Ireland to CDP, an increase of 50 companies compared to the previous year. This group of 307 includes the 55 Irish companies previously mentioned, and subsidiaries and multinationals of other companies who have operations in Ireland. If you scan through this list of companies in Appendix 3 of the report, you'll appreciate that CDP is a global reporting platform, and all companies who report to CDP, regardless of what country they are in, become part of this global program. If we take a closer look at this group of 307 companies, we see that they're fairly well distributed by sector. It's no surprise that biotech, healthcare and pharma, manufacturing and services are strongly represented, as they are every year. The sector-specific approach of CDP makes direct comparisons and benchmarking very useful feedback as part of the reporting cycle. Regardless of what sector you're in, the CDP questionnaire is designed to encourage companies to focus on particular areas of their climate action plans. What's interesting about the group of the 307 is that the average scope 1 and 2 emissions per responder with operations in Ireland totaled 32,577 tons of CO2e equivalent, compared with 50,483 in 2020, a decline of 36%. This is a continuous trend, and it represents some of the good emission reduction projects that have been happening and other initiatives such as renewable electricity that companies have been taking advantage of. Science-based targets are one of the areas that CDP have been focusing on, and it's a hot topic at the moment. If companies are looking to improve their letter score, having an approved science-based target will help increase performance. The number of companies committing to setting a science-based target is increasing rapidly. 27% of the group of 55 Ireland reporting companies had an approved target in 2021, with many more in the pipeline. This number has already risen in 2022. Indeed, there's been such an increase in the demand globally to set a science-based target that the lead time has lengthened considerably. It's also true that not every company will have their suggested target approved, which can be frustrating. Despite this, the process of setting a science-based target is incredibly useful and can point the spotlight on the measurement and management of Scope 3 emissions, which can be new territory for many reporting companies. The CDP Supply Chain Program is a framework for supplier engagement. The program enables responding companies to request climate data from its suppliers. This data is used to more accurately calculate Scope 3 emissions, facilitate supplier engagement, and enable carbon reduction initiatives. The CDP Supply Chain Program will continue to grow as companies leverage this tool to help them with their decarbonisation pathways. What is interesting is that the climate change and supply chain questionnaire are essentially the same. The companies who only completed a supply chain response in 2021 could also choose to have responded to the climate change questionnaire with one tick of a checkbox. I know this is a little bit confusing, and this, if anyone wants to know more about it, this process can be explained by the CDP Ireland network, and we can enable companies who are only filling out supply chain questionnaires to also complete a climate change questionnaire with little additional work. Although I've spoken most about the climate change questionnaire, CDP also have a forest and water security questionnaire. Many of the 55 Irish companies who responded to the climate change questionnaire were also requested to complete the water security and forest questionnaire. In 2021, just 24% of this group completed either a forest or water security response. We now have a total of just 3 companies, Smurfit Kappa, Kerry, and Greencore, who respond to all 3 themes, and that should be commended. As companies explore deeper into their upstream and downstream emissions, the relevance of the water security and forest questionnaires become more apparent. It's possible in the near future that CDP may merge all 3 themes into a single integrated questionnaire, which might give those who are already answering more than one a competitive advantage or a letter score advantage in the current reporting cycle. Finally, I would like to encourage everyone to not only read the Ireland report, which is available on cdpirelandnetwork.net, but also to visit cdp.net. There's a wealth of information and case studies and other useful information for either first-time responding companies or companies who've been doing it for many years and want to increase their letter score or improve the quality of their response. I will hand back now to Brian.
Thank you, Gavin. Some really fascinating and interesting trends, as I said, lots of them positive. We have just had word from the Minister that he has unfortunately been delayed. I think none of us will be at all surprised with that at the moment, and his attention should be on urgent matters. I can't but help thinking that if we were 100% green in our renewables and in renewable fuels and weren't still drilling the planet for fossil fuels, that we would have a lot less wars and conflicts to address. But anyway, that's for another day. So the Minister has sent his apologies. So I'm going to go straight over to Shay and the panel. We'll have an extra few minutes to hear from them. And so over to you, Shay. Looking forward to hearing the panel discussion.
Thank you, Brian. I'm delighted to introduce today's panel. With us, we have Mary Whitelaw, Director of Corporate Affairs, Strategy and Sustainability at AIB, Sean McKeown, Company Secretary and Head of Risk and Compliance at Dalata Hotel Group, and Aisling McCarthy, General Counsel and Company Secretary at Uniphar. So Mary, I'll start with you first. Great if you could tell us a bit about your role within sustainability and why climate change is such an important issue for AIB.
The report. Look, I just think we can't escape the fact that sustainability is an issue for everyone, whether we like it or not. The key themes touch on us all in different ways, whether it's climate change, human rights, or even the intersection between the two. These are very real issues, and they have a very real impact on real lives, including our own. And we all have an opportunity to change things for the better. So whether it's in our personal lives or in our professional lives, I think the very existential nature of these issues requires us all to step up to the mark and to play our role. From my own perspective in AIB, I chair the Group Sustainability Committee, which is our primary executive governance forum for sustainability across the group. And I also have executive responsibility for our central sustainability teams, through which we're doing our best to lead a group-wide transformation to embed sustainability and the management of climate risk right across the group. This obviously, it's a complex area. It requires a lot of collaboration with teams from different parts of the business. But my own experience has been that this is an agenda where colleagues care. And what I have seen is that colleagues are very prepared to put in a lot of discretionary time, discretionary effort to contribute to this agenda, probably because it's very purposeful work. It gives opportunities, that opportunity to make an impact and to contribute to hopefully building a better tomorrow and a greener tomorrow. You might already be aware that in AIB we've made a very conscious decision to place sustainability and particularly the climate action right at the heart of our business strategy. Our sustainability strategy and business strategy have become incredibly intertwined in recent years. And, naturally, as in the banking part of our business, a core focus for us is providing finance to our customers. And so therefore, in our climate action strategy, we have made that a very central aspect of it. We've set out an ambition for 70% of our new lending to be green or transition by 2030. And already earlier this month, as part of our own sustainability reporting, we were in the happy position to be able to share that already 20% of our lending is green or transition. Now, we're at an early point in the journey. There's plenty more to do, but we're committed to it. And we also recently doubled our climate action fund from 5 to 10 billion. And we're very much on track to deploy that because we're seeing huge demand for green products and transition finance. So we're doing our best to support all of our clients and customers in that regard. For my part, I'm delighted to have an opportunity to play a role in supporting the work. It's a privilege. It's also a big responsibility, but it's one that I'm very happy to wear today.
Thanks, Mary. Really interesting. Yeah, being in sustainability, you have to be an expert at everything these days. So,
or at least know somebody who is.
Exactly. Yeah. Sean, I might come to you next, just to let us know what sustainability means to you and your role within Dalata.
Thank you very much, Shane, and thank you for the invitation to be here. It's wonderful listening to the other speakers as well as Mary mentioned. It's always great learning here. I suppose from my point of view in Dalata, I've been working with Dalata since it was founded in 2007 and we listed as a public company in 2014. And I guess I started to think about the whole area of sustainability, responsible business, environmental, social and governance as themes from we had to start thinking about reporting as a public company in 2015 on our 2014 year. And, you know, I remember speaking at the time to a partner in one of the big four firms who I'd known from a previous employment. And I was thinking about, well, where do we start with this stuff? And I remember she at the time saying to me, you know, don't worry too much about what the Irish guys are doing. Look at what the best in the UK, look what the best in the world are doing. And I realized that there was quite a gap. So we started, I suppose, slowly in that journey. And as we went along, as company secretary, I'm company secretary and head of risk and compliance in Dalata, and you know, as a company secretary, you're very much involved in that corporate reporting. And I think, you know, measuring up against the requirement of corporate reporting it's like holding the mirror up to the company in terms of how well we're doing. It's a really interesting benchmark, apart from the compliance requirement of reporting itself. So as the years went along, we engaged more as a company around the topic, and we started thinking about how we could act best. We've always had the view that there was never going to be a separate corporate social responsibility strategy, responsible business strategy, sustainability strategy. There was always one strategy. That was the byline always of Pat McCann, our founding CEO. We have one strategy, so that the work has always been to integrate that. And in around about 2017, 2018, we were seeing how can we practically move our properties in the right direction. And we worked with Green Tourism, a UK-based organisation which provides sort of benchmarking or a sustainability badge for hotels. And in 2019 was the first year we were rated by Green Tourism. Most of our properties achieved a bronze rating. So that started, I suppose, a ground force movement amongst our colleagues in hotel. And as Mary has said, I mean, people engage with this. It's an area where people love to get involved. So over the 2 years from 2019 through to last year, most of our hotels have achieved a gold rating. And that reflects, I guess, you know, what I would say a ground up movement. Along the same time, we had moved from being our first response to CDP, we got a C- score, and then we've gotten to a B score. But I think we realized we'd hit a ceiling there. And then that begets a deeper and more fundamental response from us now, and that's where we're at with it now. So that's how I have come to the topic of sustainability and how we as a company have come to it. And we recognize how important this is going to be into the future. I mean, we are a vertically integrated hotel company, so we've got a lot happening in terms of our operational carbon emissions, but a tremendous amount in terms of the construction of hotels as well. As in this year, we will open 6 hotels, or have 6 new hotels. We opened one last year. Since the 1st of July, between the 1st of July last year and the 31st of June this year, 30th of June this year, we'll have increased our room count by over 2,000 rooms. And that's an enormous amount of growth. So we're very conscious of the impact of that, both in terms of the buildings and the operations.
Thanks, Sean. And Aisling, I'll come to you now.
Thanks, Shay. So, as Shay mentioned, I'm General Counsel and Company Secretary at Unifar. I also chair our Sustainability Council. I'm here probably today to represent the first responders and the companies who are in the earlier parts of their climate change or carbon reporting journeys. And much like Sean and Mary, I've come to climate change and carbon emissions reporting much by chance rather than by design. So I joined Unifar in 2019, just ahead of our IPO. And following IPO, as we embarked on a pretty big task of doing our first annual report post-IPO with a whole new set of stakeholders, it became clear that across sustainability, but particularly in the area of carbon emission reporting, we weren't monitoring that data across the group. We had ad hoc initiatives, absolutely, and it was something people were conscious of, but we just didn't have that data set there. So we had to embark on a project where we could measure that and we could find out where we are, because otherwise we weren't going to be able to demonstrate any progress to those stakeholders or our investors or anyone else. And I think my journey with CDP probably started in early 2020 at exactly this event. So we were in the fancy, beautiful offices in AIB at the launch of the 2019 CDP report. And coming away from that, it just seemed so logical that we would have a framework like this that people could consistently report emissions data into, and therefore transparently report progress to those who wanted to hear about it. So I suppose, like all companies, climate action is incredibly important to Unifar for the same reasons it is for everybody. It's the right thing to do. But I think everybody will be aware that when you look around now, companies are doing so much more in this space. And it's everywhere. Companies are, and rightly so, demonstrating all the great things that they're doing to address this huge, huge challenge. And I think when you're starting out, and particularly first-time responders, people earlier in their journey, that can be incredibly daunting, because I think you get a sense that everybody else is much further progressed in this, which is not the case. And I think the great thing about responding to CDP or even engaging with people on this topic is that you realize that everybody has to start somewhere. And the important thing is making that first step, getting on that journey, figuring out what the journey is going to be, because it's unavoidable. It's not just the right thing to do, but our customers want us to do it. Our businesses are increasingly getting questions from our upstream and downstream supply chain, asking us what we're doing in this space. It's becoming a competitive imperative for us when we go into tenders. As we've said, our investors want us to do it, and our people want us to do it. It's becoming a recruitment imperative, because people who are looking at our business want to know that we are socially, environmentally conscious. So for all those great reasons, I'm delighted to be here today.
Thanks, Aisling. It's really interesting. When I was looking down through your titles, you're all very much positioned there at the front of company, corporate affairs, company secretary. If we were to go back 5 years, I'm not sure that it's those roles that would have been here with us today. And I think that really tells a story. And maybe, Mary, just to come back to you, the CDP journey you've been responding for over 10 years, and you've had a leadership rating for since 2016. Maybe just to speak a little bit to the journey that you've been on, and what a good score means to AIB, and how it's helped you maybe engage with some of your stakeholders.
Absolutely, Shane. What I have to say up front is there were pioneers on this for this agenda in AIB before I took up the mantle. Karen Coyle and Sarah Dempsey are still very, very actively involved, but they were the front runners, shall we say, or they created the fire of enthusiasm in the organisation quite a number of years ago. And look, the first point that I'd make is really picking up on something that Gavin said. For us, it's not about the score. Of course, it's a fantastic, there's a fantastic feel-good factor in hard work being recognised. But what we find really important, and what we have really benefited from through the CDP process, is the learnings in it. Because every iteration that you go through, you learn something new, and there's a discipline associated with the process. And, you know, I suppose through the questionnaire approach, it forces you to think through what activities you have in place and where there are areas you can do more. So for us, it's been invaluable to us from a learning perspective and helping us to push ourselves to try and do more. But like so many other companies, we started our sustainability journey from the inside out, looking at our own operations first and actively working on reducing our own footprint since 2014. In 2021, our scope 1 and 2 emissions had decreased by 19% year on year in absolute terms. And so we're obviously pleased about that. And since that 2009 baseline, our emissions show a 71% reduction. So we are making progress, but we're under no illusion. There are obviously still hard yards ahead. But I think, to be fair to Karen Coyle, who I mentioned earlier, and the wider team, they've done a really good job in bringing us this far, and also have a really robust plan with a number of key strategic items that are going to help to bring us further along that journey, ultimately with the aim of reaching net zero in our own operations by 2030. I do think that by looking at our own operations first, it gives us greater credibility when we then engage with our own clients and customers. Like, obviously, as a financial services group, we have a key role to play in financing the transition to net zero. But I think it would be a bit out of whack if we started preaching about others reducing emissions if we hadn't looked internally and looked at what we could do ourselves. So looking at our own operations first, we feel it has given us greater credibility and, you know, a lot of learnings, as I've mentioned, so that we're not asking others to make changes that we haven't already done ourselves. We all are very aware that we need to take action on this agenda. And as I mentioned, we believe that the CDP approach and engaging in the CDP process has been a really good discipline for us, and it has helped us to keep focused and keep on track. And we feel that we're actually benefiting from that now on the other side, and hopefully it will continue into the future.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, I like your term discipline. There's nothing like a survey that you have to do every year to keep you on track on this topic, because while it is the most important topic, it may not be the most urgent. So yeah, thanks for that. Sean, I suppose to you, you've been, Delat Hotel Group have been responding since 2018. What are the benefits that you've seen?
I think for us, Shay, and you know, when we started, just before even we started, I mean, I think I remember, you know, in 2015, maybe getting the letter, probably signed by Brian, inviting us to participate, or inviting our CEO to participate, and I enthusiastically printed out all of the material. And by the time I had filled that lever arch file, I was a little disheartened. And I added Brian's letter in 2016 and 2017 to the 2015 one, and finally moved in 2018. And I'm sorry we didn't do it sooner, because it was a catalyst to action. I felt that we didn't have the expertise. I felt it was too technical, but actually it was very accessible when we actually put our mind to it. We found that we had a pretty good data set. We were pleasantly surprised that we were well able to respond well. And it was a catalyst to action, because we created at that time an environmental steering group from a management group across the company, including some of our central office colleagues. Most of the central functions were involved, and a very active participation from hotels. We formed environmental groups within the hotels. We signed up to green tourism that I mentioned earlier on, and that was a catalyst to action. So I think CDP has very much a catalyst to action, and the format and the way that the report or the survey is structured, I think creates a really interesting template that I think we haven't quite got there yet in terms of building into the planning process from a ground up level. You know, in parallel with that, as you know, the investment world was becoming more and more in tune with the need to respond to the threat of climate change. You know, we had, you know, our participation in CDP had increased, you know, board level awareness and other educational things we were doing with the board. And we created a full board committee with responsibility for ESG, which we treat of and we report in our annual report with the same level of seriousness and gravity that we do the typical three committees for audit and risk, remuneration and nomination, and we give it equal rank in our governance structure. And that has been a powerful catalyst in terms of moving us through, particularly 2021, when we've really taken a root and branch approach to the way that we do things, true to the original I suppose, mantra that it be something that is fully integrated from the start. And this year we have set short-term targets. We haven't committed to science-based targets yet. We thought about that and thought about making that commitment when we were announcing results last week, but we decided we'd hold off just a little bit because we feel that we need to understand a little bit more about what our decarbonisation pathway looks like before we make that commitment. But each of our executive directors this year have very significant objectives in terms of helping us to determine what that looks like. And hopefully by the end of this year, been in a position to be very clear about how we articulate our long-term ambition and what medium-term targets. And hopefully, if we can manage to understand, I suppose, square the circle between our growth ambition and the imperative of absolute carbon reduction, we would hope to be in a position to do that. But I think that CDP was the spark.
Brilliant, thanks, Sean. It's really interesting the knowledge gap and the level you have to bring your colleagues up to get them educated on this topic. I feel like I work in sustainability every day, and it's constantly learning, constantly changing. So it's definitely a challenge. And Aisling, to you, I suppose the same thing. What were the key drivers for Uniphar to start responding, and maybe even to touch on that knowledge gap within Uniphar? Was that a barrier for you before you started responding?
Yeah, so I suppose one of the key drivers was when I turned on my heels out of AIB in 2020, full of enthusiasm that this was something as a business we needed to do. And thankfully, at very senior levels in Uniphar, there's no trouble getting that backing. So there is definitely an information gap, and people aren't always aware of the frameworks like CDP. And I suppose one of the challenges in these areas is that the people who are often tasked with this, it's not the day job. So you do have the challenge of trying to balance a day job as well as doing this and exploring this and learning about it. But that was early 2020. And I think the other important thing to say is we couldn't have done what we've done to date alone. So we did rely heavily on Jay and Brian and their other colleagues in Clearstream to guide us through this process, because the CDP is phenomenal because it provides that framework and it gives an output for the data that you can gather, and it does lots of other things, but it can be a bit daunting when you don't have that. And I know Sean mentioned he had good data sets. We were quite the opposite in Uniphar, because Uniphar is an incredibly acquisitive business. So we had bought a lot of businesses in the run-up to IPO, and we've acquired another 12 plus since. So just when you think you're getting on top of a data set, you have to then integrate more data into that, and it becomes a movable feast. So the big emphasis was, what is our baseline? And for 2020, in order to report at 2020, which is something we really wanted to do, we had to take it in bite-sized chunks. So we opted to go for the mini CDP response in respect of our operations in the island of Ireland, because to get that data, particularly with new acquisitions more globally, we felt it was more feasible to do that in the time that we had. So we took it in little bite-sized chunks. So in 2020, we made our first submission, but it was the mini submission in respect to island of Ireland. And then immediately following that, we knew where we were headed. We knew what data we had to get. We were a little bit more familiar with the types questionnaire and where we were headed. So we gathered that data in early 2021 and made our first full group submission in 2021 across all our companies globally, which was fantastic and was a huge step for us. And I think the other important point to note is not only did CDP give us an output for our data and a focus for how we gather that data, but the links to TCFD, discussions around the strategy aspects of it and governance helped me in terms of having to identify what is our governance structure within the business. Where is this going to sit? Because it didn't have a natural owner. We didn't have a sustainability officer in the business. So it prompted a discussion around, okay, who is going to be responsible for this? Who are they going to report into? What sort of oversight is our board going to have? And we came up then with our Sustainability Council, which again, it's hugely important for Uniphar, because as a business, we have 3 separate divisions, and increasingly we need to start pulling those together and start having them all talk together. So the opportunity to have a Sustainability Council was another great focus for us. has hugely helped us in getting to where we are now.
Brilliant, thanks, Aisling. I suppose today the theme of today's report was ambition to action. So I'd just like to come to each of you in terms of like what's the key project for this year, or what's the thing that you're working on at the moment that you're really excited about, like whether it's targets, decarbonisation pathways, supplier engagement, or reporting, because I know there's a huge amount going on in that space. It'd be interesting to get that from each of you. Mary, we'll start with you again.
Great, thanks, Jay. And look, from an AIB perspective, we can broadly bucket our climate action implementation approach across 4 broad headings. In the first instance, we obviously look at what we're doing in our own operations, and I spoke a little bit about that earlier. With an ambition to reach net zero by 2030. But secondly, we also look at what we're doing to support our customers to achieve net zero. Our ambition there is that we'll have reached net zero in our financed emissions by 2040 or 2050 if you include agriculture, because we're conscious that that sector has an additional layer of complexity to it. But we're in the process of setting science-based targets to inform our approach and to help us achieve this. So that in its own right is a really significant body of work, particularly as, you know, I think all of the panelists have alluded to, like there's a complexity there because we don't have all of the information yet. So as we engage with the Science-Based Targets Institute and look at the global pathways and then translate that to look at it, well, you know, what it looks like from an Irish perspective, there's information gaps and there's a dialogue that needs to happen as we try to fill them in. But that science-based target setting is a huge piece of work. Thirdly, we look at how we can finance green and transition projects. We have our 10 billion climate action fund. And as I mentioned, we're seeing strong demand, you know, both in terms of financing large scale renewable infrastructure projects, but all the way through to, you know, consumer level green mortgages, green loans. And so there's a strong awareness there. And I suppose we recognise that we have a role to play there in terms of both providing the finance, but also providing information. And then finally, the fourth area that we're focused on is making sure that we build an appropriate risk management architecture so that climate risk is managed with the same rigour and the same consistency as any other risk category. And that's obviously particularly important to us as a financial services group. We're regulated. We have regulators in a number of different jurisdictions, whether it's the Joint Supervisory Team on the European side, the Central Bank in Ireland, the PRA in the UK, or the Fed in our US operations. And so there are differing approaches there, but building that robust risk management framework that will see us into the future. And as part of that, I include our reporting mechanisms. So ensuring that there's the same rigor around our non-financial reporting as there is around our financial reporting. So again, that's another big body of work. And I guess it requires like system change and so on to make sure that we can gather that data in a way that's consistent and reliable. We're particularly blessed because our Chief Sustainability Officer, Yvonne, comes from a data background. So that has given us quite a bit of a head start there in terms of being able to envisage what the requirements are and map that into a program of work. Because obviously that system change side, you know, it's expensive. So we need to be sure that we're doing it once and doing it accurately. But so across those 4 categories, there's a lot going on across the business. And ultimately, we try to be as transparent as possible about all of it. And other ESG items through our sustainability reporting. We recently published our sustainability report alongside our annual financial report. And so we've set out lots more detail there in relation to the work that's underway and the stage that we're at on it. And as I said, just try to be as transparent as possible there in our disclosures.
Thanks, Mary. I'm sure no one will be frightened after hearing that body of work you have set out for yourselves.
But it's interesting. It's all good.
It is that shift from I suppose there's a huge mindset shift required when you're thinking about science-based targets. We like that kind of thought of having to set targets but not knowing how you're going to get there. But Sean, I might come to you. It's an area I know you're familiar with as well.
Yeah, I think this year.
Just conscious of time, actually, we've only a couple of minutes, so maybe just a minute or two, and same for Ashley.
Yeah, sure. Sure. No, I think another big year of learning for us ahead in 2022. We're very focused on understanding our decarbonisation journey. We started last year with Modern Hotel Glasgow, which opened in August last year, and we did a really deep analysis of it from a embodied carbon point of view, and also operational carbon over the lifetime of the building. What could we have done better with Modern Glasgow? So we're going to start to build that into new projects as they come through. When I made the comparison, I made the point that we're a vertically integrated hotel group. People look to leadership from the global brands in hotels, but one needs to remember that they're franchise operations. So when they talk about their own carbon footprint, they're talking about their central office. They're not talking about all their hotels. So we've got all of that on our if you like, in our P&L when it comes to carbon. So understanding that fundamentally is going to be important. We've also going to look very carefully at how we measure. So our finance function is going to take full responsibility for everything that we measure, both in terms of carbon emissions, but everything else to do with our ESG program, and that's going to be important. We're also going to start to collect carbon data from our key suppliers. We're going to start that process of looking at the third parties and start to look into the supply chain as well. So there's a lot going on, a lot of learning to happen this year.
Brilliant, thanks, Sean. And Aisling, yourself, the key project you're really excited about?
All of them, Shay, all of them. Yeah, there's lots going on here. So we'll have gathered Scope 1 and Scope 2 data for the last 2 years. So our emphasis is now moving on from that and grappling with our Scope 3 emissions. And I think all companies are the same there. It's not data we all have at our fingertips. So there's definitely a little bit more work to be done in relation to Scope 3. But we did in December commit to setting an SBTi target. So we're thrilled about that. We haven't figured out exactly how we're going to get there. So in the meantime, we've set an internal target on our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions to reduce them annually by 5%, so that by the time we get to 2030, we'll have had a 50% reduction on our Scope 1 and Scope 2. So the real emphasis for us at the minute is on that Scope 3, getting that data. We have workshops lined up for all of our managing directors and people in their teams to talk about decarbonisation in the next few months. And I'm absolutely thrilled to say that our executive directors and our MDs now have an objective in their bonus structure, that is that they have to set divisional and group decarbonisation plans by the end of this year. So hopefully we will have a much better visibility on how we're getting to achieve that reduction over the next few years by the end of this year. And then once we have a better sense of our Scope 3s, we'll move on to supplier engagement.
Brilliant, thanks, Aisling. In the interest of time, I don't have time to come to you all in terms of a last piece of advice, but summarising all of your points, I think it's just for those companies that haven't already just get on that journey. So hopefully we've provided the audience with lots of insight, and thanks for taking the time to participate in the conversation today. I'll hand back to Brian now, who will close.
I was just saying that listening to the maturity and the way that the panel were able to articulate the climate change initiatives and targets and plans, it was only back 8 years ago when we set up the network we could have only dreamed about. So I'll say I'm just really excited and thrilled and wonderful to hear about all the plans they're doing. Just finally, hopefully the 300 or so people who registered for the event today got lots of value and understanding about what is best practice, what they need to do, and if they're interested in reporting to CDP, what they need to think about. I'd like to thank the panel today, all the speakers, Owen and the committee for all their hard work, as I said earlier. Thank our sponsors, Tver, for doing a great job on the audio with us. CDP report is available online at cdpireland.net. I'd like to specifically thank Grania and Gavin and Shay on the Clearstream team for all the hard work they do. It's tireless putting this together every year. We have a mountain to climb. We have a collective mountain to climb. But there is a sense now that we know as businesses what the height of that mountain is. And we're starting to get an understanding of what the tools that we have at our disposition to climb that mountain. So really the time for the planning and the ambition is coming to an end. We need to close that door and we need to start moving. The time for action has come. Thank you very much for joining us, and I look forward to seeing many of you over the coming 12 months as we move this climate agenda further. Thank you.